All right, guys. Hundar here. I'm hanging out with Jason Bender, senior game designer for Diablo 3. A lot of exciting stuff so far. I sat in on a Diablo 3 panel yesterday. I kind of want to just review some of that information for people who maybe weren't watching on the live stream or weren't here in person. First up, PvP. Can we just talk about the state of Team Deathmatch right now? I saw that it was a 4v4. Just some of the new details on that.
Yeah, well, we realized that it was a lot more fun to stay in the game the whole time than it was to be dead on the sidelines.
Yeah.
So we decided to do a team deathmatch style game where you can constantly play. If you die, you can just jump right back in there and get your revenge. It's a 4-player co-op game anyway, so we expect people to kind of form groups of 4 and be used to that. And so between the tactical elements and the fact that 4 is a natural number because that's where we make our parties elsewhere, we settled on that, and it feels really good. And it makes for a little bit more chaos, but at the same time, the survivability is a little higher. We up the hit points so people live a little longer.
Right.
So you can make some decisions, you can escape, and it's a lot more. It feels like it has a lot more depth now.
And of course, you're bringing in your PvE gear for these battles, correct?
Yeah, well, we thought it was important that we didn't split up the way you view your characters. We want people to have a character that they're building up, that they're getting gear for, that they're playing all the time. And there was just no natural way for us to split that up. What happens? Do we give you some fake gear for PvP? Do we give you some fake characters? Like, what? And none of it felt good. It feels better to go find awesome gear and say like, hey, you know what? I could really use an axe that generates fury for PvP so I can get these skills out faster. I'm gonna go find one. I mean, Diablo's about getting that gear you want.
Right.
So it's just another reason to want good gear.
Now, you mentioned you guys are in some of the final tuning stages for the classes, and we heard kind of in an individual level, like, the Barbarian's in a good state now, the Wizard's in a good state. Can you just lightly go over some of that information?
Yeah, well, we have some of it was the passives. From the panel, we were saying that some of our passives synergized too well, and that what ended up happening was some of the builds were popping out as dominant. Like, well, if I take these 3 passives, I get this great advantage, and then I don't have to look at these other 13 passive skills, that we made that we think are really cool. So we've been just making sure that those are broken up so that. Jay Wilson made a very important point about viability. It's not about the optimal build, it's about viable builds. So we're trying to, smooth out those spikes of power, bring those down a little bit, and bring everything else up. So you can build a character that you're excited about. Hey, if you want to build a witch doctor with no pets, it's important that works. So we're trying to make all that stuff work. But overall, it's been a lot of fun.
We also touched lately on the difficulty modes. Some people were talking about in the beta right now, they're like, oh, well, it's really easy. And those fears of like, oh, this is easier than Diablo 2. And then he showed that clip from Diablo 2 where it was like, no, it's actually completely on par. Can you just, as far as what we can look forward to in those harder difficulty settings, there really is a huge amount of challenge, Craig.
Well, so people often ask us, they're like, okay, I played the beta. The game seems pretty done to me. Like, what's the deal, right? And so like, okay, well, yeah, the beginning of the game's pretty done. Right. Even still, we've changed a lot of stuff since the beta. There were a bunch of changes from feedback. But people haven't seen Nightmare, Hell, Inferno difficulty. So we've had people playing Inferno difficulty, and we're saying, hey, is this hard enough? Is it really hard enough? And they're like, it's pretty darn hard. Yes, but is it hard enough? We promised really hard. Yeah. So we've been tuning stuff that people haven't been seeing, later difficulties, making sure that the monsters get tough at a good rate, that your equipment advances at a good rate so that the monsters don't outpace your equipment or vice versa, and then that the skills, that the runes are still interesting at high levels. There's a whole bunch to consider once you get up there to make sure that the depth is there, and that we've been focusing on that.
And in terms of loot itself, he quoted something like 70% of the in-game loot is on the higher difficulty levels?
Yeah, like, for example, armor art. There's a whole bunch of armor you don't even see until you get into Nightmare. It can't drop. It's dropped by level, right? So, until you're level 32, 33 and started in Nightmare, these things aren't even in the drop table. You can't find it. So that's true all the way through Inferno. There's a whole bunch of loot that just doesn't even show up unless you're playing higher difficulty.
That's amazing. Real quick, in terms of class design, when you've got the option with a lot of these classes where it's like, okay, I want to build a battle monk, or I want to, do these sort of, non-traditional builds, how is the focus for building a class where it's like, okay, we for sure want the wizard to be like this, but then we also want it to have the freedom for this, but, not so much that it suddenly feels like I'm playing a barbarian,
Yeah, so we have some high-level philosophies that we go with from the beginning. Like, the barbarian should be able to take a hit. He should never be worried about getting into combat. He should want to be in combat. So we give him a lot of things that are high defense, high survivability. He gets life back, but he has to be in melee, which gives him a disadvantage against certain things. Right. But once we get our skills in place, we look at it. We're like, hey, you know what? We gave him a weapon throw skill, and we gave him a ancient spear, which is another kind of range skill. It kind of would be cool if you could play that way. And people, I'm happy to report, are playing ranged barbarians. We consider it, we call it aberrant build, but basically it's another viable build. So you can run around with the right rune. We were finding that people were using a rune that allowed their weapon throw to ricochet off multiple targets and get them fury back. And if you have the right rune with that and with Ancient Spear, we actually had to nerf weapon throw like a lot because it was way dominant, because people were just like bouncing axes off 6 dudes at once, and they would never run out of fury and just kill things by droves.
Awesome. Well, as far as the beta itself is concerned, will we see any new content added to the beta before release, or is that just still up in the air at this point?
I can't say that we're going to add anything to the beta necessarily, but I will say that we're taking a lot of feedback from it, and we've already made a ton of changes. And if we could show you what we had today, it would look pretty different in a number of ways. We're really tuning up the skill system, making sure that works well. Jay talked about that a little bit, but we want to get it entirely in everyone's hands. We don't want. I'd rather not be giving out beta after beta after beta, so people could just like keep gnawing on the same thing. It's better to give you guys the whole game. So we're focusing on finishing it because let's be honest, we want to play it, right?
All right. Well, from one Diablo fan to another, the game is looking really good, and I'm super excited. So stay tuned for more BlizzCon coverage.